Across the country, rent has become a quiet crisis. But in 5 states, Americans are living for a fraction of what the rest of the country pays. The strange part is that nothing is hidden. The clues sit in public data, overlooked by nearly everyone drowning in big city prices. These states are not loopholes or miracles. They simply follow different economic rules. And once you understand those rules, the idea of relocating becomes less dramatic and more logical than you might think. The surprising part is that more people have not put the pieces together yet. Let us start with a state that many people still underestimate: Oklahoma. It is the kind of place that hides in plain sight, where a paycheck stretches farther than anyone expects, and rent bills look like they belong to a different decade. Apartments that would break a budget elsewhere feel manageable here, and the math behind it is not a trick. It is built into the way the local economy operates. Only after you study the renewal numbers and property tax charts does it become clear why the costs stay so calm year after year. This quiet stability belongs to Oklahoma. Those numbers are not promotional deals. They echo through local housing reports, landlord associations, and long-term rental data that show a consistent pattern. The reason is simple and structural. Oklahoma never allowed its housing market to float entirely on speculative pressure. Land remains available, construction costs stay grounded, and zoning rules in many areas still support building practical housing instead of only high-end inventory. When supply can grow without being choked off, rents do not lurch unpredictably upward every year. Property taxes add another layer to the story. Oklahoma regularly appears on lists of states with comparatively low property tax burdens. For a landlord locked into a mortgage, that lighter tax load translates directly into room to charge less without operating at a loss. Over time, that shows up in the way monthly rents behave. They do not have to keep chasing rising tax assessments, because the assessments themselves do not spike with the same violence found in other states. Then there is the question of what you actually get for your money. In many Oklahoma communities, the square footage per dollar feels out of sync with what the rest of the country has started to accept. A family paying more than $2,000 for a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a larger metropolitan area can stand inside a similarly priced Oklahoma home and feel the difference in breathing room. Yards appear again, driveways reappear. Storage is something you have rather than something you negotiate for. Cost of living indexes back up the feeling. Groceries, utilities, and insurance all trend beneath the national average, which means the rent savings do not get quietly erased by higher prices somewhere else. Gasoline remains relatively affordable compared to national spikes, and car insurance follows. The same pattern, because congestion and collision rates never climb into the extreme tiers that anchor some coastal cities. The real power emerges when you combine those pieces across an entire year. Someone moving from a high-cost region might cut their rent by $700 to $1,000 per month, then discover that utilities are lower, insurance is calmer, and everyday errands do not drain the budget. Over 12 months, the gap between the old life and the new one can feel like regaining an entire small salary. Talk to people who have already made the move, and a common theme appears. They did not arrive chasing a trend. Many came for work, family, or a change of pace, and only after a few months did they realize how much lighter their daily finances had become. That is the quiet kind of advantage that rarely appears in national conversations. And while Oklahoma shows how far a single paycheck can stretch, the next state reveals something different, a place where the path from paying rent to owning a home still exists in a way that feels almost old-fashioned. Arkansas. There are still corners of America where the path from renting to owning never closed, where a modest income can secure not just a roof, but actual space to breathe. In these regions, housing costs have refused to follow the national spiral, and listings read like they were printed in another era. Rents remain tame, home prices look human, and utilities behave predictably. Once you check the data and talk to locals, you find yourself looking at Arkansas. Take a typical working couple leaving a mid-sized city where a modest 2-bedroom apartment consumes more than $2,000 every month. In Arkansas, that same couple can routinely find a similar or larger space for somewhere between $700 and $1,000, depending on the region. The difference does not live in fine print. It sits plainly in public rental listings, county reports, and long-running cost of living comparisons. What makes Arkansas stand out is not just cheap rent in isolation. It is the way low rents intersect with unusually accessible home prices. In many counties, the median home value still lands far below the national level, sometimes in ranges that people from more expensive states assume no longer exist. It is not uncommon to see livable houses with small yards priced in territory that looks like a rounding error on the loans being taken out in major coastal cities. That gap creates a path that many renters elsewhere have lost entirely. A realistic bridge from paying a landlord to paying down their own mortgage. Monthly payments on a modest Arkansas home can equal or even fall beneath the rent people are used to paying in pricier cities, especially when property taxes remain modest. For a family that has written off home ownership as a concept belonging to their parents' generation, that realization can be disorienting. Daily life costs reinforce the effect. Groceries in Arkansas often track below national averages, and utilities remain reasonable thanks to accessible energy sources and relatively mild extremes in some regions. Healthcare, while always complex, shows a pattern of lower out-of-pocket costs in many communities compared to the towering bills that haunt certain high-cost states. When you stack those categories together, the monthly expenses form a pattern that feels almost suspiciously manageable to someone arriving from a city where every bill has a way of expanding. Work opportunities complicate the story in interesting ways. Arkansas is not a single narrative of small towns. University hubs, light industrial centers, and healthcare corridors create pockets of stable employment, where wages may not match the highest national figures, but stretch much further because the underlying costs are anchored so low. Add in the rise of remote work, and a new possibility appears. Residents earning salaries tied to more expensive markets while spending at Arkansas levels. Of course, affordable does not mean effortless. Rural distances mean that in some areas, a car is not optional. Public transportation may not match what urban dwellers are used to. Yet, for many people quietly doing their math, those trade-offs are easy to quantify. A car payment and extra gasoline can still cost less than the rent difference between their old life and their new one. The longer someone stays, the more visible the compounding becomes. The money not spent on rent and inflated daily costs flows into savings, debt repayment, or small improvements that increase quality of life. Over a handful of years, that can add up to something that looks like a completely different trajectory. Arkansas shows that the ladder from renting to stability is not gone everywhere. And if Arkansas feels like a preserved snapshot of the past, the next state tilts the frame even further, offering some of the lowest living costs in the entire country in a way that has barely broken into mainstream conversation. Before we move on, take a moment to think about your own situation. If any of these numbers already feel lower than what you are paying now, imagine what shifting your life to a calmer cost structure could actually mean over a full year. And while you are here, share your experience in the comments. What does rent look like where you live? And have you ever considered moving somewhere more predictable? Your perspective helps others understand the real landscape behind these statistics. If this breakdown gives you clarity, tap like and subscribe so you do not miss the next update that could save you real money. West Virginia. Some states whisper their advantages through the numbers rather than the headlines. Here, the cost of living index keeps landing near the bottom, but what that really means is simple. People can live without fear of the next rent hike. Apartments rent for prices that feel like memories. Homes sell for less than the down. Payment required elsewhere, and the rhythm of daily life moves at a pace most of the country has forgotten. The landscape carrying this unlikely math is West Virginia. Rent here does not just come in lower than the national average. In many counties, it registers among the lowest figures in the continental United States of America. A one-bedroom apartment that would push well past $1,500 in a mid-Atlantic metropolitan area can appear in West Virginia for $600 or $700. Larger spaces, including small houses for rent, remain attainable for figures that many city dwellers instinctively assume are misprints. Home prices tell a similar story. Entire counties report median home values that undercut national numbers by huge margins. Houses that would have been bulldozed to make way for luxury projects in other regions still function as family homes here with sale prices that could be covered by what some households pay in rent over a few years. For people looking to step out of the rent cycle, that alone can be enough reason to scan listings. Of course, low prices never exist in a vacuum. West Virginia has struggled with job losses in traditional industries and the slow erosion of economic anchors that once defined the region. But that same shift has created an unusual opportunity window. As remote work creeps outward from technology and professional sectors, a growing number of workers can carry their income with them while shedding the costs associated with big city life. For that group, West Virginia's low housing costs become less a symptom of decline and more a strategic advantage. Daily living reinforces the math. Groceries, while not dramatically cheaper, often fall below national averages. Utilities stay manageable, especially in areas where water and energy are both abundant and infrastructure remains solid. Car insurance, property insurance, and other recurring costs tend to land lower because congestion is rare, accident clusters are limited, and property values themselves do not push risk categories into extreme brackets. There are quieter benefits too. With fewer people crowding into the same few neighborhoods, the bidding wars that define rental markets in dense cities simply do not materialize in most towns. A vacancy means a real opening, not a line out the door. That reduces the psychological pressure that keeps many renters on edge, always worried that the next lease renewal will be the one that pushes them out of their own community. It would be easy to dismiss West Virginia as too remote or too rugged for most families, but the reality is more varied. Border towns sit within commuting distance of other states while preserving West Virginia-level rents. University communities blend small city amenities with lower costs. Even in more isolated regions, some people find that the trade-off between scenery, quiet, and budget room skews heavily in their favor. What emerges is not a fantasy of living free, but a very real pattern where the core costs of staying housed and fed consume far less of a paycheck than they do in the places many people are trying to escape. West Virginia shows what happens when housing markets do not collide with speculative mania. And while it may hold some of the lowest costs of all, the next state shifts the focus again, not just toward cheap rent, but toward a full life budget that almost feels engineered for affordability: Mississippi. At first glance, it seems like an ordinary southern stretch of land until you start adding up what it costs to exist there. Month after month, expenses fall into a pattern that defies the national story: low rent, cheap groceries, gentle taxes, and service costs that stay grounded. It is the sort of place where the word affordable still means something measurable. This economic calm belongs to Mississippi. Housing in Mississippi starts with modest rent expectations. In many cities and towns, a functional one-bedroom apartment still resides in the mid-hundreds, rather than climbing well past $1,000. 2- and 3-bedroom rentals that would feel extravagant elsewhere show up at prices that align with what some people pay for a studio in a coastal city. These are not temporary incentives or short-term deals. They are standard listings in markets that never absorbed the fever that pushed rents skyward elsewhere. Home ownership follows the same pattern. Property values are low enough that monthly mortgage payments on a decent house often rival what people from more expensive states think of as bargain rent. When you add in the fact that Mississippi maintains some of the lowest property tax rates in the country, the picture tilts further. A homeowner's escrow payment does not balloon to cover government revenue gaps, which means landlords and owner-occupants alike can maintain their homes without passing huge tax hikes into the rent or budget. Where Mississippi becomes particularly interesting for anyone dreaming of living almost free is in the way its other costs align with housing. Groceries, healthcare, and basic services regularly come in below national averages. Dining out is not treated as a luxury reserved for special occasions. Car insurance, while always tied to individual circumstances, tends to sit on the low side of the national spectrum due to lighter traffic and fewer high-value claims. Even utilities can tilt in the residents' favor. Energy prices remain competitive, and while summers can be hot, winters are generally mild enough that heating bills do not reach the punishing levels seen in colder states. For someone arriving from a region with extreme winters, the simple act of not paying for constant heating can produce savings that stack on top of an already lower rent. There are trade-offs that require clear eyes. Certain regions of Mississippi wrestle with underfunded services and limited job diversity. Public transportation is sparse in arse. Many communities making car ownership close to mandatory, but for individuals and families shifting into remote work, online businesses, or portable trades, the old problem of local job scarcity can be softened by income streams that do not begin and end at the county line. The result is a kind of financial compression in reverse, where high-cost states squeeze every dollar until nothing remains. Mississippi's low baseline allows households to cover necessities and still have room left over. That leftover portion can go into debt reduction, modest investments, education, or even simply breathing easier month after month. Over a few years, that difference can mean arriving at middle age with savings instead of exhaustion. There is an unspoken irony here. Many people only think of Mississippi when national news points to struggle. Yet, for those quietly looking for a place where the cost of simply having a roof, food, and basic security does not require constant crisis, it offers a toolkit that most high-rent cities cannot match. And while Mississippi shows how low costs can go when a state never inflates them in the first place, the final state on this list bends the formula in a different way, combining low rent with a tax structure that can make a paycheck feel noticeably heavier without any change in job title. South Dakota. Far from the coasts and high-density corridors, there lies a state whose financial system rewards people for staying put. Paychecks arrive untouched by state income tax, housing prices resist speculative inflation, and rent rarely spikes overnight. The longer you study its public records, the more its logic unfolds: predictable costs, honest paperwork, and quiet opportunity. This unusual balance is found in South Dakota. Start with income tax, or more accurately, the lack of it. South Dakota is one of the few states in the United States of America that imposes no state income tax on individuals. That single decision rewrites household budgets in a way that is easy to underestimate. For a worker arriving from a state that collects a meaningful portion of every paycheck, the switch can feel like receiving an automatic raise, with no promotion and no side hustle required. Housing then stacks on top of that advantage, rather than canceling it out. While South Dakota has seen some growth in popular cities, median rents in many areas still sit well below the figures dominating national headlines. A clean one-bedroom apartment in a smaller city may cost roughly what some urban dwellers currently pay just to park near their building. Larger spaces, including townhouses and small single-family homes, remain attainable at rents that do not devour half of an average income. The cost of owning a home carries the same quiet friendliness. Property taxes are generally lower than in many high-cost coastal states, and housing values, while rising in certain pockets, still allow ordinary earners to contemplate ownership without signing up for a lifetime of precarious payments. For someone used to seeing even the smallest starter homes priced as speculative assets, South Dakota's listings can feel strangely reasonable. Insurance and transportation costs deepen the effect. Less congestion means fewer claims, which means car insurance often undercuts national peaks. Many rural and small city residents drive regularly without facing the same risk profiles that inflate premiums in dense urban areas. Road conditions, maintained for long stretches across sparsely populated regions, allow vehicles to rack up miles at steady speeds rather than enduring constant stop-and-go punishment. Over time, that translates into lower maintenance costs and longer vehicle lifespans. Utilities, while subject to cold weather during the winter months, benefit from relatively straightforward infrastructure and access to multiple energy sources. Heating costs can be planned for and budgeted through predictable cycles, rather than spiking alongside sudden regional crises. Groceries and daily necessities, while not dramatically cheaper in every category, tend to align with or undercut national averages when measured across an entire cart. Then, there is the matter of residency itself. South Dakota has become well known in certain circles for its streamlined residency procedures, making it particularly attractive to people whose lives are not anchored to a single physical address. For remote workers, traveling professionals, and yes, even some full-time recreational vehicle or RV dwellers, The ability to establish legal home status in a state with no income tax, reasonable housing, and straightforward bureaucracy is not a trivial detail. It is a major component of their long-term financial strategy. The cumulative impact looks something like this. A household that relocates from a high-tax, high-rent state can simultaneously reduce what they pay for housing, eliminate state income tax, and trim insurance and transportation costs. Each change by itself might feel modest. Together, they form a gap measured in thousands of dollars per year. Over a decade, that difference can fund retirements, businesses, or simply a life that feels less like a constant sprint. South Dakota's story is not a fairy tale. Winters are real. Distances are long. Not every town offers the same opportunities, but for those who match its rhythm, it offers something increasingly rare in the United States of America. A structure that does not fight your attempts to live within your means. Rent in many parts of the United States of America now feels like a permanent emergency, a bill rising faster than anyone can reasonably adjust. Yet the numbers threaded through Oklahoma, Arkansas, West Virginia, Mississippi, and South Dakota point to a quieter truth. The idea of living almost free has not vanished. It has simply changed locations. None of these places promise an effortless life, but they offer something most cities no longer can: room for a single paycheck to cover more than survival. If you have ever questioned whether you are paying more than you should, share your experience in the comments. And if insights like this help you breathe a little easier, tap like and subscribe so you do not miss the next update that could reshape your cost of living.